My name is Gershwell Brooks. I'm actually the head of Mandela Day at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and it's an honor for me to be the moderator for this particular session. Just a brief history, as I mentioned, I'm at the Nelson Mandela Foundation at the moment. I'm an LLB graduate or law graduate that disappointed his mother severely because I never practiced as an attorney. Instead, I spent 4 years in the corporate space. After that, literally stumbled into the media space. I'll tell you that story over lunch or a cup of coffee. Did a bit of radio for 702. Every now and again, when someone goes missing, they call me and I sit in for them. I occasionally write for the Daily Maverick. Most recent article was actually published on Monday, which was a major surprise to me. I thought I was rusty and had forgotten how to write. And yes, as I said, I'm currently at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Prior to that, I was also at the South African Human Rights Commission. I've been working in the civil society space for quite some time. But you're not here for me today. Instead, you're here for our very esteemed panel. So I'm going to introduce the first member of our panel. That's, of course, no stranger to any of us, the UN Resident Coordinator based here in South Africa, Mr. Nelson Muffuh. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres appointed Nelson Muffuh from Cameroon as the United Nations Resident Coordinator in South Africa with the host government's approval. He took up his post on the 1st of December 2023. Nelson Muffuh brings more than 20 years of experience in international relations and negotiations. I've seen Mr. Muffuh negotiate. He's a very strong negotiator, I say. Political and development issues at the United Nations headquarters, regional and country levels. Prior to his appointment as United Nations Resident Coordinator, Nelson Muffuh served as Chief of Staff and Principal Strategic Advisor to the UN Deputy Secretary General since 2017. Mr. Muffuh, I'll ask you to please take the seat if you don't mind. Which one? I'm introducing everyone, that seat there, please. I'm introducing everyone in no particular order. Up next, of course, is Professor Vern Harris. Don't tell anyone, but he's technically my boss at the Nelson Mandela Foundation because he's the acting CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Vern is of course, he was rather, Mr. Mandela's archivist from 2004 to 2013, directed the Foundation's archives program for 15 years and the dialogue and advocacy program for 5 years. He is an adjunct professor at the Nelson Mandela University, participated in a range of structures which transformed South Africa's apartheid archival landscape, including the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and is a former deputy director of the National Archives. He has authored or co-authored at least 6 books, the most recent one being Ghosts of Archive in 2021. After you. I'll ask you to skip one and take the seat here, please.
Sure,
Thank you.
Sure.
Up next is, of course, Tanya dos Santos Ford, Sustainable Leader here at GIBS, which is our very gracious host today. Tanya is a sustainability leader and advisor affiliated with GIBS. She was previously at Investec, where she worked originally in investor relations, then group strategy, and as global head of sustainability for Investec Group, responsible for sustainability, strategy and reporting, ESG ratings, sustainable finance, and climate action. She is also the former head of Investec Rhino Lifeline and sits on the board of the Swiss Life of Africa, SWAF, which helps to raise awareness and the funds for endangered wildlife, in addition to rural education and contributing to the wildlife economy. Tanya, I'm going to ask you to please take the seat in between I'll ask you to take the seat on my left. And I double-checked with her before we started because I don't want to call people by their first name and, they're offended. Up next, of course, is none other than Phuthi Mahayela Dabangwe. I'm sorry if I got the pronunciation wrong, but Phuthi nonetheless joined Naspers as South Africa CEO in July 2019. Before joining Naspers, she was the co-founder and executive chairperson of Sigma Capital, an investment holding company formed in 2015. She held the position of CEO at Shanduka Group, an investment holding company from 2004 to 2015. Prior, she was the head of project finance South Africa business unit in the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Early in her career, Muffuh worked in New York at Fieldstone, an international firm specializing in the financing of infrastructure assets. I'm pretty sure you will all agree with me that Muffuh is probably one of the most famous CEOs in South Africa. After you, you get the last remaining seat.
Okay.
Okay, with that, I'll take my seat and kick off this particular conversation. I think the first question goes directly. We're going to go straight into the conversation. We're not going to spend too much time with opening statements and that type of thing. As you saw, we've already introduced our esteemed speakers this morning. Mr. Muffuh, I'm going to turn to you first and foremost. I think based on what we've seen this morning, both from what you had said in your opening remarks, also looking at what we have achieved thus far with the SDGs, what needs to be done to speed up progress so that we can actually reach those goals in 2030, which is just a little over 5 years away?
We need to stop diagnosing and start acting. As the Secretary General in the clip you just watched indicated at the end, promises made must be promises kept. So that means we need to accelerate the provision of financing that is needed from the international community for developing countries to take action on this. We need to look at ways of national governments, and in the South African context, mobilizing and allocating resources in the right way to address existential problems. Poverty is lagging behind, inequality is persisting, and unemployment is also a challenge. So what needs to happen is acceleration and transitions. You watched the video about the transitions that are needed. 6 have been identified because they're catalytic, and if we make progress on those 6, it has an impact directly on the rest of the 17. We talked about education systems that need to be transformed. That's foundational. We talk about food systems, climate smart agriculture that needs to be invested in and accelerated. We talk about digital connectivity to be able to take advantage of technology and innovation. That has a cascading effect across all the other goals. We talk about energy. And in the South African context, you can see how fundamental that is as well. So if you invest in energy, make it affordable, accessible, and renewable, then there are advantages across the value chain. We talk about social transformation, things like social protection. I talked about jobs. It's at the core of any thriving economy, if you can have jobs. And of course, the issue of the climate and biodiversity. Now, that also has an impact. So if we focus on those, what we call transitions, and when I say focus, I'm not talking only about governments, I'm talking about international partners playing their part. We're talking about governments playing their part. We're talking about private sector playing its part, and individuals as well. And so all of that will make the difference that we need to see in an accelerated manner over the next 5 years. I don't think we have a choice, because failure is not an option. We have the imperative to act.
Indeed. And I liked what you said, that we need to stop diagnosing and start acting. And I think part of that is also debates. Things that are clear and present danger are still up for debate, interestingly enough, in this day and age. Of course, we live in what we can refer to, and I hope I'm still in touch with recent times. I believe we're in the 4th Industrial Revolution, time of technology. I hope that we haven't slipped into the 5th yet, and I'm still stuck in the past. But as a leader, Muffuh, of one of the most important technology companies, could you talk us through how we can harness the power of technology to advance the SDGs?
No, thank you for the question. So one of the things that we note on the video is the fact that we're 5.5 years away from meeting the 2030 SDG goals. And when you look at the fact that, 258 million people still have no access to SDG 4, quality education, around the world. When you look at the fact that, when you look at SDG 5, women still earn 77 cents of the dollar, of the dollar that a man earns around the world. When you look also just around the fact that 3.7 billion people still have no access to the internet, that's how much work still needs to be done. Now, when you look at the technology space, there is a lot that is being done. and specifically looking at the SDGs, in ensuring that we can ensure that people have access to education, have access to careers, have access to meaningful lives through access to education. But first, we have to ensure that people have access to mobile penetration. And I think when you look at the continent itself, it's clear that we still have significant challenges. And so within this 5.5 years, we have a lot of work to do. And certainly from our perspective as an organization, that is something that we are significantly focusing on. When we look at, particularly in education, in ensuring that every person has access to education. Here in South Africa, we have an entity called NASPERS Labs, where we're providing access to education to young people digitally, so that from access to that, they're able to then be employed immediately thereafter. And it's one of the things that's critical for me, that we're not just providing access to digital education, but we're providing access to employment, so that people can then be able to really advance their lives through access to that employment, but through activity economically.
Muffuh, you'll be pleased to know that as we speak, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, the actual site here in Houghton, is actually hosting or co-hosting Coding for Mandela, which is a collaboration between the Nelson Mandela University as well as many other entities in teaching young people how to code, school-going children how to code without the need for expensive digital technologies. So I think definitely taking a step in the right direction there. Sticking to first names, Vern Harris, the acting CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Now, it being, of course, Nelson Mandela International Day, with a call to action being it is still in your hands, or in our hands, to combat poverty and inequity. Why is the Nelson Mandela Foundation participating in these discussions happening today?
Well, you will remember, I'm sure, Madiba in 2008, as he was turning 90 years of age, in 2 speeches conveying the sense that the world was in a worse shape than when he came out of prison, but that he felt he was too old to keep contributing. And that's when he said, it's in your hands now. And so for us, it's about continuing the work that he and his generation of leaders started. But there's an urgency now. Madiba died in 2013. We're in worse shape than we were then. And for us then, it's about finding the will to do differently, because we have capacity to do differently. But human behaviors have to change. And we also have to be willing to think outside of boxes. If we look at the scale of human migrations globally now, it's clear that we're going to have to find a way to think outside of the box of the nation state. What does that look like? We have to reimagine democracy. So we're here because we want to contribute not only to the work that gets your hands dirty, but also to that very important work of thinking differently.
No, most definitely. Of course, Tanya, we can't say anything else but thank you to GIBS for hosting us here today, for making this, for being a part of making this happen. But the one thing that stands out for me is that this needs the collaboration of everyone, including business as well. So how can we best ensure that university courses include sustainability education so that students graduate prepared to make a positive impact in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thanks, Gash. Well, good morning, everyone. I think it's appropriate for me to say welcome to GIBS. We're really happy to have you in our space. It's lovely to look out there. It's awesome for me to see the SDGs all over the place. Nice and brightly coloured. You can't miss them. So, to be honest, our Dean, Morris Mtombeni, is the one who should be answering this question, but I'm 25, almost 30 years in business, and now I've shifted into academia. So I'm giving you a perspective of what I've seen in the past year. And one of the reasons I left corporate was because I got tired. I got really, really tired of constantly having to fight for this space and explain it and defend it. And somehow I was deluded into thinking that I was going into academia and everyone would get me. Like this was just everyone, you know, the youth, the young people, the business leaders, everyone was really going to understand why the UN SDGs are so important. And unfortunately, that's not what I discovered when I arrived. And it's not what I've seen from my engagement with universities around the world. So there's a lot of work to be done around integrating sustainability into every discipline in universities. You know, if I just think of your general, disciplines, economics, the global architecture around economics has to change. Just chasing after GDP has not succeeded in reducing inequalities. So just following growth is not an option. So economic faculties need to rethink their content. Finance, the financial architecture is not working. The IMF is under criticism because of the financial architecture, is not channeling capital to where it needs to be. I could go through them all. Marketing, there's so much work to be done. And yet what you're finding is that sustainability gets put in a box, and there's a team on the side that are focusing on it, 1 or 2 people, and you might throw in 1 or 2 electives that have a sustainability or a climate angle. And this is universities around the world. This is not unique to GIBS or South Africa. And for me, that is what needs to change. It needs to be fully integrated across all areas. Everyone needs to live this. And that goes across all education institutions as well.
Tanya, your observation is actually stunning because it leads into directly the next question, and that is in terms of how we think then in the business space. And Mr. Muffuh, this is where I come back to you. I mean, how does the UN better than encourage investment and mobilization of funds for projects that contribute towards the SDGs? And we're not just talking about governments here, but we're also talking about business, of course. And going back to the model that you had described there, we also see it in business spaces where sustainability becomes one or two functionaries within HR need to deal with that. And then maybe Mandela Day will do something quickly. We'll scramble, do something quickly on Mandela Day, and for the rest of the time is about what's happening on the balance sheet. So how does the UN then contribute towards that conversation and saying, this is something we need to take seriously?
I mean, I think it's by shifting mindsets as well. Moving from corporate social responsibility and seeing doing good as something charitable to integrating that to the core of business. So not even corporate social responsibility or corporate accountability. Now there is the ESG, environment, social, and governance standards that businesses have to adhere to. At the UN, and we're also grateful to GIBS actually for hosting the UN Global Compact Network in South Africa. It's hosted here. And that's also a network that seeks to mobilize businesses, corporates around the world on sustainability and the core principles, the Global Compact principles that include a lot of the SDGs on human rights and governance and corruption, and also advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. So it is really, really important that we keep on doing that and hold business to account, but also explain to business the opportunities that contributing to a sustainability, I think, embraces. And that's why we also are very happy to have champions in the sector. For example, Puti, thank you very much for joining this conversation and being also a leader in that sector. We also have one of my mentors, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who's in the room, Tiger Brands Chair, also embracing this and driving the change from within business that is needed. And that's what we need to see going forward. And at the global level, we have things focused on Africa, which is about influencing financing flows towards sustainability, the Global Africa Business Initiative. Soon we're talking about contextualizing that in the South African context as well, to match the SDGs and the investment opportunities with the financing and actions by business stakeholders to ensure that they are part and parcel of this journey. Because like I indicated, it's a whole of society, whole of economy intervention that is needed.
I mean, core to what we are discussing today in terms of the SDGs is obviously the tagline, for lack of a better term, the call to action, not leaving anyone behind. But all too often, the criticism is that as business, civil society, government, we're not doing enough to ensure that we're not leaving people behind.
Yeah.
So Puti, in your area of work, how do we then harness technology to ensure that no one is left behind?
So what we are doing is we are ensuring two things primarily. Ensuring that there's digital inclusion through the programs that we run globally to ensure that people have access digitally and have access to programs, etc. Number two, we drive entrepreneurship, ensuring that people have access to, whether it's capital, access to support in driving their businesses. And we've seen that happen successfully. All the businesses that we operate in, and we operate in 100 markets globally, are businesses that started off as startups, early stage businesses. An example is a business called iFood in Brazil. When we invested into that business, it was a startup, an early stage business. We invested into it. Today, it is servicing not only people in Brazil, but in Latin America, 850 million orders per annum. And that is done through AI. By harnessing AI and ensuring that you can push through deliveries and make your business more efficient. So ensuring that we have more people who are digitally enabled is not only good for us, it's good for society. And that is why for us it's important that we are ensuring that everybody is digitally enabled. And whether it's basic skills or advanced skills, we are taking young people, even from universities, and ensuring that they have digital skills, because we require these digital skills. You know, we're a digital importer of skills. And so we need to ensure that we have more people available with the skills required. And so we are ensuring that through digital education, but also through ensuring that through entrepreneurship that we are creating the opportunities.
Vern, one of the biggest, I guess, tensions that we deal with at the Nelson Mandela Foundation is the tension between the 18th of July being a moment of massive mobilization versus sustainable, ongoing work being done. How do we marry those two? And how do we, in this particular conversation, encourage people, in essence, to make every day a Mandela Day, and then, in turn, have the significance of the 18th of July?
Well, we try as far as possible to always connect the activations that we participate in around the 18th of July to the longer term systemic work that we do and that our partners do. And Mandela Day provides nothing more than a platform for reminding ourselves of Madiba's calls to us, but also reminding ourselves of that longer term work that still needs to be done. And to pick up on a couple of the points here is, it's clear that we have to find ways of giving meaning to the social contract that underpins democracies wherever you find them in the world. Secretary General just a couple of years ago talked about needing to reimagine that social contract. And so a lot of the work that we're doing that links into our Mandela Day activations is precisely about exploring collaborative work that involves the private sector, civil society, and the state. We have to address what we see as a growing alienation from these formal processes and formal structures of all three sectors. You know, we engaged with young people really intensely through last year around not giving up on elections. So many of our young people chose not to vote. So those are some of the challenges that are not addressed by a Mandela Day activation or an event like this. But you've got to be pointing to that long work that is demonstrating that you can change systems of power that are not delivering to people.
And I guess the only time that anyone can take us seriously in this conversation is if the work has been done all along, as opposed to waking up on the 18th of July and saying, let's have a conversation. Tanya, turning to you, to what extent can academic institutions encourage more robust partnerships between business, non-profits, the state, and propel development and execution of environmentally friendly solutions?
I think it covers all areas of sustainability and not just environmental and climate. But I think this event is a great example. You know, GIBS is a neutral ground. It's a safe space that all these different players can come into and voice their opinions, share their ideas, you know, get that true sense of I'm being heard, which often doesn't happen in other spaces. I think the other advantage that academic institutions have is they've got a lot of really young, bright minds who are really eager, but more importantly, they really care about this stuff. They really care, they do. It's deep for them. It's not something they've woken up to late in life. So you've got this eagerness that's, you know, they're just ready for you to tap into and use, be it on the data side, be it on the research side. So I think that's one really awesome area. And I think the other one, for me, the difficulty is the execution part of your question. Because it's great to come together and have these discussions, but when we leave the room, where's the list of actions? Where's the list of to-do? Who's taking responsibility for making something actually happen? And I think that's where it's a little harder, because everyone almost needs to make their own to-do list. And then there's got to be some kind of accountability.
Indeed. Mr. Muffuh, with 5.5 years left before we look back and we assess whether we've achieved the goals or not, what role does the UN play in ensuring and helping member states achieve as many, if not all, of those SDGs?
It's one of convening, which is at the heart of what the UN does, bringing people together, informed by the best analysis and data sets, to be able to take the decisions that are needed and to act on them, the point about action. Let me just underline one thing. You mentioned the tagline, leave no one behind. So we need to ensure that every intervention we're making across the social, environment, economic, governance spheres understands who's being left behind and who needs to be part of the solution. Not only about who is being impacted by our actions, but who needs to contribute to bring about the change that we need to see. And in the South African context, certainly, if you're talking about rising unemployment, that impacts women disproportionately, that impacts those in the most remote parts of the country disproportionately, that will impact those who are transitioning from fossil fuel-based economy to renewable or low-carbon economy, then we need to look at that. That would, in fact, impact indigenous people. If you look at the video as well, we talked about migratory flows, so people on the move and refugees as well. Thinking about how we advance solutions that really, so that's what the UN does, bringing all of that together and bringing unusual stakeholders together as well and forcing collaboration. I use force deliberately because no longer do we have the latitude to do business as usual. So we need to make sure people come together and try to be disruptive. The UN is not known to be advancing and advocating for disruption, but I think we need to disrupt the systems that brought us to where we are and work differently going forward. So that's what we're trying to do. Certainly that's what the UN country team in South Africa is trying to do, working with our colleagues across the world to try to bring about this change that is so very much needed. And there's a Summit of the Future that is coming up in September this year, where the Secretary General is working with the member states and their leaders to think through what sort of reinforced multilateral cooperation is needed to address issues of peace and security, sustainable development, not forgetting future generations. So really, there's a lot of work being done, but as Vern also alluded to, enough talking, more action. And so it's really about how we also, as the UN, start holding stakeholders to account, and but giving them the pathways to transition and do things better.
But very quickly, what is, in terms of getting to those goals in 2030, for you, what is the major priority that we need to prioritize?
I think for us, it really is about just ensuring that we have everyone having access digitally, being digitally inclusive. That is a critical issue for us. and also working closely with the United Nations, ensuring that we can, harness all of our work in doing things the right way and leaving no one behind, as Nelson Muffuh said.
Vern, I think the one thing that stood out about Madiba was his ability to bring parties from across the spectrum together in some shape or form of unity. How do we achieve that in this climate? How do we bring communities, business, government, international community, everyone together towards reaching these goals?
Well, let me first say I don't have great hope that we will achieve those goals. And in fact, I'm sure we won't globally. And hope is not enough. What inspires us about Madiba is his extent to keep fighting, keep believing, even when contexts, situations are hopeless. And I think for us globally and here in South Africa, perhaps particularly, is what brings us together is finally understanding that we either find solutions together or we won't find solutions. We all have a stake in finding that transformation, that change that is desperately needed.
Tanya, very briefly, you, apart from working in the hallowed halls of academia, you've also worked with communities. What is the one takeaway working with communities for us to be able to try to achieve those goals?
So we've spoken quite a bit about SDG 4 and education being so important. And for me, one of my biggest takeaways was learning in the Bushbuck Ridge community, which is adjacent to the Kruger Park, that it's all very well to focus on education and digital access, but the majority of that population don't even have access to water. So SDG 6, it doesn't exist. So if we don't focus on that first, we can't do anything else. Food, they don't have access to food, they don't have access to energy. And there's so many other SDGs that are almost the cornerstone to be able to, allow the others to flourish. Morris likes to talk about the climate being the sharp end of the spear. And for me, I really believe that community-led initiatives need to ensure the basics are there, so water, energy, etc., but then they need to become social enterprises. They cannot continue, they're not sustainable on their own, when it's continually this philanthropy or donor giving. The model we have to find and we have to get right is turning community initiatives into social enterprises, and that'll give proper social upliftment.
Well, everyone, I think with those closing remarks from Tanya, the one thing that's blatantly obvious is that the SDGs are interrelated. That they're not individual boxes, and that if we, for example, deal with food security, that suddenly the world's problems are solved, that they're actually dependent on each other, and that's a theme that will run throughout the course of the day. Really looking forward to getting to that. I think enough said from my side. Another round of applause for our very wonderful panel. I'll ask them to return to their seats.
Good morning, everyone. My colleague Luleka is going to be thanking you with some bottles of wine. These wines come from Wendy Applebaum's farm, and Wendy is the daughter of our benefactor, Sir Donald Gordon, the late Sir Donald Gordon.
Yes.
And so we're very proud of sharing these wines with everyone. And in concluding, collaboration doesn't happen amongst friends. Friends cooperate. Collaboration happens against people that are sitting on opposite ends, like the current news that have developed recently. And so I don't think you need to force it. The whole point is we do need collaborations, and it's a part of a key aspect of SDG 17 partnership. So congratulations, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's yours.
Appreciate it, man.
Is this mine? Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. That brings the panel to a close. Another quick round of applause. I think that was a stunning opener.